So everybody tells you Little Rock is affordable, but nobody tells you what that actually means, when your bills start showing up. So let's do this differently. I'm going to give you a real monthly picture of what's genuinely cheaper here and what isn't, and one of these expenses that catches almost every out-of-state buyer off guard. I'm Dunivan. I'm a realtor here. I live in North Little Rock, and I run these numbers with people here just about every week. Let's dive in. So here's the thing that surprised me more, when I moved here, I really started paying attention to this. The overall cost of living here in Little Rock is actually about 5% lower than the national average. Now, 5% really doesn't sound like it's that much, right? But that number is lying to you a little bit because the average of everything, that's the average of everything. That's groceries, haircuts, movie tickets, it's all blended together. And most things I just mentioned, barely really moves the needle in your life. But here's the one thing that absolutely makes a difference, and it's housing. So housing here runs about 20% under the national average. You heard that right. 20%. Now, think of that about that in your own budget. What percentage of the monthly goes towards, your house? How much of your income goes towards that? For most people, it's a third. Sometimes it can be, 50%, closer to half. So if that one line item in your daily budget and your monthly budget, drops by a fifth, about 20%, that's not 5% change in your life. That's a lot. And that's why people, when they move here, they feel it immediately. I had a client from Phoenix, and they sold their house over there in Arizona, and they were able to buy a bigger, nicer house with money in their pocket. They couldn't believe it. They were able to sell their house. They paid off the loan over there, had a substantial down payment, and lowered their house payment. I can't even substantially. We're talking like it was more than 20% because they were able to put in such that big down payment. But that cost of just realizing that was just eye opening for them. It was a shock. So when we get into the median home prices here, it's about $250,000, right? If you're coming from Dallas, Nashville, Denver, or on either coast, you just did a double take, and that's okay. That's normal. I watch people do that on my video calls constantly. But I want to be straight with you about this because this is where people get burned. The purchase price is not your total monthly budget, right? Your actual payment is the principal, interest, property taxes, homeowners insurance, mortgage insurance, putting, something, you're putting 20% down. Plus, there's also HOA dues, if your neighborhood, has them. I've seen people fall in love with a price and then get, a real payment quote, and it's $400 or $500 more a month, higher than what they had in their head. So, you need, build your budget around the real number from day one. And one thing, a cheaper house is not automatically a cheaper house, right? Older homes, typically they're going to have aging roofs, maybe the original HVAC system, dated electrical, and the house can cost you more to own than one that's about $30,000 more. All new systems or newer systems. So take everything into account. Don't just judge by the purchase price sticker. Okay. Let's talk about the things that you pay every month. There's utilities. The national average here comparatively is 7 to 11% lower. Arkansas has some of the cheapest electricity in the country. Let me tell you something. You feel it here. Say 10%. That's a lot month over month. But this is the part that I want you to actually hear. Budget for summer. Okay. June through September, your air conditioner is going to be working right hard. And that's what drives the bills, up, and that average up statewide. And that really depends on your specific house too, right? And the age of your HVAC. How well your windows are insulated, the age of those windows. And then obviously the insulation of your house. And, a big one too that people don't think about is, how much direct sunlight you're actually getting. in the afternoon. If you have shade trees that help shading your house, that's absolutely going to help lower that bill. Something to keep in mind. So when you're touring homes here, I want you to look, at the mechanical stuff, not just, the kitchen, but look how old the unit is. Look at the windows. That's your bill that you're going to pay every summer for as long as you own it. Moving on, we're looking at groceries. Overall average, 3 to 4% lower here in Arkansas. The food you take home, what you get cooked, is just lower cost of what you would in other states. That's a small savings, per trip, but everybody eats. You're going every week, every month, however you do your shopping, it adds up over the year. Healthcare here is cheaper too, right around 10% lower. And that matters, more than people expect, especially if you're looking at, retiring here. Okay. And here's the part that, a lot of people don't talk about. So if you're coming from Texas, Tennessee, Florida, this section is for you. Arkansas has an income tax, state income tax. Okay. I say that plainly because I've watched people who, build their whole relocation budget and completely forget about it. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it's definitely something you definitely need to be mindful of. And here's the good news about that, though. Our state income tax is dropping. It's been consistently dropping. The top rate is down 3.7%, I believe it is right now, right around that. Back in 2013, it was 7%. So it's been cut roughly in half in a decade, and it's one of the lowest rates in any state that has an income tax at all. All right, so it's something to keep in mind. And if you're retiring here, Arkansas doesn't tax your Social Security, and that's a big one. Now, the other side is your sales tax. It is on the high end. State rates puts city and county, they all have their sales tax. And it's going to put you right around the 8% range, depending on where specifically you're living, where you land, right? You won't notice it on coffee, but you're going to notice it on a big purchase, if you're buying furniture or your car. So here's the honest summary. Income tax is lower than you'd think, and it's getting better. Sales tax is a little worse than average, and property taxes are reasonable, but you need that number on the actual house. Don't do a rule of thumb or an estimate just because somebody's cousin pays X amount, in property tax doesn't mean you will do. So we're going to move on and, how to run your own numbers, right? Here's what I tell you to do instead of using that online. Pull your last 3 months of bank statements, actual spending, not what you think you spend. Now change two things, just two. Your housing number and your transportation number. Swap in realistic Little Rock figures for both of those. Now leave everything else alone because that's going to be pretty close because your grocery bill, your subscriptions, how often you eat out, that stuff is mostly the same. It's basically based on your own habits. So that's going to be pretty good, estimation on, what you can spend here in Little Rock. So that gives you a number built on how you actually live, which no city comparison tool can do. You're not going to find it, right? And I'll be honest about what I see. Most people moving here from a bigger metro area save real money, sometimes thousands, 1,200 a month. I've had people run it and basically find out, it's a wash because of their lifestyle, their driving habits, their budget, but not necessarily, where they land in the zip code. But there's to know before you move than after you move, figuring out what those numbers look like. When you're looking at Arkansas, what the brochure leaves out. Okay. A few things people don't budget for: cash for closings. Like if you're buying a house, everybody saves for the down payment. They consider earnest money, inspections, appraisal, lender fees, your moving truck, utility deposits. All of it is the same. It hits right around that 3 weeks. So just keep that in mind. Plan the money that you'll have left, not just the money you need when you get here. Insurance is a big one. Get quotes during your inspection period, not the week of closing. I can't stress that enough. I've watched a comfortable deal get real tight real quick because nobody priced out insurance until day 25, with being under contract. The first 90 days, furniture, these are your expenses within your first 90 days of moving your furniture in the rooms you didn't have before. Do you need a mower, blinds, and little stuff from the inspection. It's real money, and it's better in a budget than on a credit card. So keep these in mind when we're budgeting, okay? And two things when it comes to weather, right? Storms happen. Not often, but when they do, the city slows down for a couple of days. If you're coming from so dry, the humidity is real, and it's going to be an adjustment. Not necessarily the heat, but the humidity. Okay. So is Little Rock actually cheaper? If you're coming from a bigger metro or either coast, absolutely, and you will feel it. It's almost entirely because of the housing. Okay. If you're coming from a small town in maybe a no income state, you may not. You have to, need to run on numbers. And here's the last thing I'm going to leave you with. The question isn't, can I afford this house? The question is not, can I afford this house? Your lender will answer that. And they'll answer it bigger than you should. What that means is that, they're going to let you know what you're qualified for, and you need to go up to that amount, right? And the question is whether the payment that you do choose based on your purchase price leaves you room for activity to live, for travel, if you're going to save, if you do overhaul, you need to replace that HVAC system without having a panic attack, right? Don't necessarily want to be house poor. I don't. Not everybody does. So, okay, if you want your actual numbers instead of national averages, call me 501-988-3758, or you can email me, Zach@DownandRealEstate.com. Tell me where you're moving, where you're thinking about kind of what you're paying now, and I'll give you a straight comparison. No pressure, no sales pitch. Okay. And if you're buying your first home, I run a free first time home buyer class that walks you through this entire process, start to finish. And the link's going to be in. I also wrote all this up with the full breakdown and the sources on my site. That link's in the first description if you want that in greater detail. If this helped you, appreciate a follow, subscribe, share this video with somebody who thinks, tell me kind of where you're moving or kind of what you're thinking and what you pay in housing right and where you live. I'll tell you, what that gets you here. I'm Zach.